to welcome you on behalf of the members of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and particularly our Iraq Initiative, to the podium to speak to our audience here, and perhaps, if your schedule permits, to take a few questions afterward. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Governor SHABIBI.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I'm actually very pleased to be here. I have, of course, followed and read the activities of the Chamber of Commerce, and we are, of course, here to further the relationship between the Iraqis, and especially the Iraqi business sector, and of course the American friends, which I think is very important for both countries, but especially for the Iraqi economy. Of course, I would like this to be, time permits, some kind of dialogue, more than talk or lecture or something. But I'm going to give a brief idea about the salient development in the Iraqi economy, and questions, of course, are the most important aspect of this talk, and I'm ready actually to respond to these questions and to have a dialogue after that. As you know, of course, before 2003, the Iraqi economy had very high and even actually rampant inflation, the huge external debt, and of course, in general, weak currency and a depreciated currency, and of course, we have also, because of the sanctions, because of many problems, at the time we had low oil output, and we had actually a lot of unemployment, which is still probably there, but of course better than before. And above all, we have actually a destroyed infrastructure. We had, of course, all the government departments, and of course the whole administration is paralyzed to a great extent, and the economy was, of course, managing its affairs day by day. So actually we were not able to affect any kind of development, and of course sanctions was an important factor, but the policies to respond to the sanctions were also not adequate. But all these things, all these characteristics which I just mentioned point out to the fact that when in 2003, we are just faced with a situation where we have to retain stability, economic stability. Now, of course, central bankers are not politicians, so whenever I talk about stability, I mean economic stability, not political stability. Sometimes we talk about political stability, of course, but I mean, I always actually mean economic stability. So we thought that actually we should attain economic stability, because without stability, you cannot actually move forward. You cannot, of course, move forward in order to specify your goals. For example, you don't need to have some kind of uncertain environment, because uncertain environment prevent you from specification of your objectives and, of course, above all, attainment of those objectives. So what Iraq actually needed, because stability is very important for growth, it needed actually to pave the ground for this growth, and therefore it needs to stabilize the situation, to actually stabilize the exchange rate, and to have some kind of low inflation. Because all these things are very important to achieve some kind of predictability, because you cannot have development if you are not able to have some kind of power of predictability. You cannot specify your objectives. You cannot, of course, specify any parameters and in your plans or in your budgets and these things. So we concentrated, especially in the central bank or monetary policy, on the stabilization of exchange rate, because, of course, the period before 2003, we were actually suffering from a lot of problems and gyrations in the exchange rate, a lot of fluctuation in the exchange rate, and depreciating Iraqi dinar very much, and we had also very high inflation. You would agree with me that under these circumstances, it's very difficult to plan and to have your budget, even if it is annual budget, let alone having, for example, 5-year budget or something like that. So these actually stable parameters are very important for specifying all your development plans and development budgets. And of course, we were concentrating also and spent some time to organize and to streamline, let us say, what we call the payment system, because of the importance of government in the economy, because of the oil sector. Therefore, actually, we are the banker of the government. And in this case, we had actually to organize all these payments. So any actually procurement, any kind of payment by the government goes through its bank, which is the central bank. So stability is very important in terms of having a stable exchange rate, low inflation, orderly payment system. And these are very important ingredients to have a development budget. You cannot embark on development programs with fluctuating exchange rate, with, of course, high inflation, and your payment is uncertain. I mean, all these things are very important to have development budget, and of course we communicate a lot with the government, we coordinate a lot with the government to make sure that these stable parameters are there. And now it is, of course, we pave the ground for the government to act on this. And of course, the government is utilizing the opportunities provided by this stable environment. Not totally, but I think they are making use of that. And we always, in our dialogue with the government, we mentioned to them, we actually provided these bases for your development. It is now up to you to work on development objective, because you don't worry about change in exchange rate, you don't worry about other things, about high inflation and all these things. So the ground is actually prepared for the government to work. But it's not only for the government. It is the ground is prepared, the conditions are there for the government to embark on its budget, and for investors in general, domestic and foreign. So I think this stable environment, the investor doesn't need to think about actually what will be the exchange rate 6 months from now, for example. Or, I mean, at least they see that there is a very solid objective to maintain the stability of the exchange rate, and to, of course, to control inflation. And investors are interested to see their payment is organized on all these things. So this is the economic side. Of course, the political side and the security side is a different matter. But of course, they are supposed to go hand in hand. And in fact, I think the government is trying its best in order to make use of these events in order to actually complete the picture, because you have financial stability, then of course your macro your political stability and military and all these things, and the security situation is actually a whole integrated picture that will have to be completed. And in this case, I mean, we can comfortably invite all investors to come to Iraq because the conditions are there. Of course, Iraq is a rich country. I mean, rich in the sense that it has oil, but it is not rich in terms of development. Let us actually make a difference. So I think the question here, it is the ground is there. The ground is prepared for investors to come actually and to embark on their activities, and and those organizations who are actually responsible for that, banks and the central bank, were able to actually, to a certain extent, I mean, there are a lot of exogenous factors, as we say in economics, but we were able to for example, the central bank using the reserves in order to maintain this stability. I mean, sometimes people say, well, the reserves, I mean, which is actually growing, I mean, why don't we use them for current budget or something like that? But of course, the reserves are using to maintain this stability, which is good for the government, good for investors. So all these policies, all these, what is happening here in terms of attaining stability is that it is actually not only good for the investors, it's good actually for the government and for the formulation of its budget. I mean, I'm very glad to see that when the budget, which is of course a fiscal issue, not a monetary issue, that people who are formulating the budget, they don't think about actually what the future behavior of exchange rate, the future behavior of price level, because they have become, they are now more or less sure that things are very well controlled or let's say under supervision all the time. Of course, I cannot say that this will be 100%, will continue to succeed. No economist can actually, especially when we work under uncertainty and globalization and all these things, we cannot say that this will be 100%. But of course, we have, of course, all the for example, the reserves. We have all the question of monitoring, and we are watching the situation to maintain this stability in terms of all exogenous events. Of course, there are a lot of theoretical things which, for example, you have something called, although it is very remote, something like, for example, currency wars or currency attacks or all these things. I mean, you know, all these things can happen and they increase the money supply in the country and those things in order to but then the country has the reserve to encounter that and all these things. So all these things, actually, the stability is there for what we call actually the real sector, government, non-government, to work. Government, non-government, international. It's all real sector. So you are all welcome to work in Iraq. You need to be sure that actually stability is there. I mean, we are all hoping that stability in the political sense and in the military sense is actually, we can, of course, achieve very high level of that. And, of course, it will be definitely the stability in terms of the financial sector will help achieving that, and there is and that's why actually we are helping all this real sector in order to sometimes, of course, some people think that the central bank can go beyond that, beyond providing stability, I mean, go directly to financing. But I mean, central bank, of course, financing the stability of the exchange rate. It cannot finance projects, of course. It's not the job of central banks. But nobody actually in the country is responsible for the stability of the exchange rate, which needs a lot of money, because, I mean, you hear about the auction and all these things and meeting the demand for foreign exchange and all these things. I mean, this is auction, and we pay a lot of money for that. So we are actually paying our share in order to stabilize that, and And this is actually very important for the external, let us say, the external side of the economy. And in fact, I mean, I'm sure all investors here definitely will look on the security situation in Iraq and see all the news in the TV about problems and all these things. And but even, of course, suppose that you have everything is fine and security is 100% and all these things, but when you come, of course, to changes in your macroeconomic variables, the stability variables, I mean, people will be reluctant to come unless they are sure that these things are also stable. So you can be sure as investors, you can be sure that this macroeconomic picture will remain. Of course, we are a country we are an open economy. I mean, about 98% is oil actually dominates the economy, and because of the fact that we are open economy, we are affected by all developments. I mean, we are currency flows and all kind of imports and exports and all these things they are all actually variation in all. Now, for example, in the world, you have all kind of increase in food prices and all these things. I mean, this will affect us, no doubt. And when this has an effect on the exchange rate, we intervene, no doubt. And the government intervenes when there is shortage of these goods in the market and all these things. So what I want to say is really that this environment will continue. This is stable environment in terms of these achievements is going to continue, and it's going to help, of course, the government, to help the private sector, and at least to formulate the budget, to formulate the plans, and they need actually to be reasonably sure when they invite investors. So this is actually in general what I wanted to say about our contribution. And of course, most of I'm ready here actually to respond to any question. I did not want to go to the picture of GDP and the structure of GDP because this is not very much directly related to the picture. Is that what sort of environment we have for investors, and this is the environment we have for investors. But thank you very much. Yes,
yes. If you just provide your name and your affiliation.
My name is John Weissenring from Arlington, Virginia. With respect to the ongoing need for stability in Iraq and its exchange rate, would it not follow that there's a direct need for a potential revaluation of the currency to induce both domestic and foreign investment in Iraq? And with regard to that, how far do you believe that we are from a potential revaluation of the Iraqi currency?
Yeah. We collect questions or we respond to one by. Okay, we respond just there. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for this question, and well, even if I know the answer, I cannot tell you. Well, the thing is, no, I think the question is all, you cannot have an economist saying without the answer, it depends, you know. So the question here is actually a revaluation will, which really is going to depend on to what extent we are going to continue, let us say, controlling inflation. As you know, I don't know if you go to the central bank law, you will see it's in the website. You will see the first objective is maintaining price stability. So there is a little bit of inflation in Iraq. I mean, it's now, it used to be 2% or 3%, now it's about 5%. But we are watching that very carefully. If this inflation continues, we will have to revisit. It's more than revisiting, I cannot say. We are going to revisit the question of exchange rate because, I mean, revaluation, I mean, depends on inflation. Of course, I mean, you know, the other factors that determine the movement in currencies are a lot. I mean, some kind we look at trade, I mean, exports and imports and all your obligations and the balance of payment and all these things. Definitely, no doubt, you look at those. But those are problems relating with more with the development part of the economy. The question of maintaining price stability is really something you see the inflation and all these things, because nobody else in the economy is concerned with inflation. I mean, the government, when it put its budget, I mean, the government is spender and the central bank is saver. So it's not very important for them to mention and to concentrate on inflation. So actually the question here that we are going to track and follow the development in inflation first, and of course other factors which I mentioned second, and then we will determine our exchange rate movement.
Thank you, Governor. This may be the same question, so I can understand if you can't answer it, but I've heard a report that...
Have your name, please?
Oh, my name is Bob Kelly. I am an investor in Iraq, the Summit Hotel in the International Zone with the OPIC financing. But I've heard a report that just in the last couple of days that Iraq is about to cut 3 zeros off of the currency, and that they call that redenomination. That may be the same question that you just received, but I wondered if you had any information about that.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether it's the same question. I think this cutting 3 zeros it has, of course, it shouldn't be exaggerated, actually, the problem. I mean, the question is just redenomination, and I mean, people, of course, you see a lot of people that writing a lot of articles in the newspapers, I mean, criticizing the central bank that is going to, the value of the Iraqi dinar is going to depreciate or something, all kind of talk. I mean, this is a question just actually to facilitate payment, facilitate actually ease of counting and all these things. And of course, I mean, when you see now a lot of figures, I mean, you see trillions or I mean, huge figures actually. If you want to be precise, you put about 12 figures or 15 figures and all these things, 15 digits or something. So I think we have a plan on that. And you remember why there was no actually a government decree to add these zeros. They happened actually because of the course of development of the economy at the beginning of the 80s. I mean, just inflation was very high. Inflation was rampant, and therefore, I mean, small notes and these things were actually not started not to be used on these things. So government started to add the 3 zeros and these things and at the time. And of course, conditions are different now. Inflation under control, exchange rate is managed by the central bank, all these things. When you had actually the zeros, you could not manage, not of course because of the fault of the government or the central bank, which I think there was, but I think the question is that because there were a lot of exogenous factors. I mean, we're not saying that we are champions now. I mean, there were actually a lot of external factors which affected actually the behavior of all economic stakeholders. And therefore, actually, a lot of people didn't know actually what to do. They have started to add 3 zeros and all these things. So now, actually, the situation is completely different from that time. You had a high inflation, you have now a low inflation. You had actually something which is a stable macroeconomic situation. I mean, at the time, actually, the situation was not stable. So the only way to combat all of these things at the time is to increase the denomination and put 3 zeros. I think to bring back the Iraqi dinar, where actually 3 zeros are removed, and of course you have to, this will have gone hand in hand with monitoring of the exchange rate and all these things, and you will see. I think now it is probably. I mean, we are studying that. Not studying. We have decided actually on that. But when to implement that, to remove all these 3 zeros is very soon. But of course, this requires not only the central bank activity. It requires, because I mean, it's something you have to make a lot of propaganda, a lot of advertisement campaign and all these things, and you have, of course, to go probably a campaign to educate a lot of people on these things. So I think it needs a lot of help from the government, from many people in the government, especially the security forces. And we hope that security forces become less busy with the violence issue so that they can devote time for us.
Yes, ma'am. Mike? Just the mic, please.
Dr. Shabibi, مرحبا أهلا وسهلا بك نورت البلد. Thank you, welcome. The town is much beautifuler with you here.
Thank you. Thank you
with
very
the cherry
much.
blossoms.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, my name is Dr. Kiradagi. I'm with the KHRW, an NGO that works in Iraq for years and years, actually since '92. And we have been working mainly in the north before Iraq liberation, and after that in the rest of Iraq. And I wanted to ask you, Dr. Shabibi, what is the plan of the Iraqi government and the bank as far as business development for women and giving opportunities to minorities and women in micro-enterprise and lending and helping them start small businesses? I would really appreciate your answer. Thank you.
For women?
Yes, sir. For women and for minorities, as well as for underserved and disadvantaged population. Especially since we work a lot with widows. It's, as you know, Iraq has the largest number of widows going from the south to the north. And because of the war and the violence, we're going to see increasingly more orphans and widows, and these are going to be heads of households. Therefore, I do encourage that even small businesses, even businesses and investors that work in Iraq have a public-private partnership with the mainstream and with minorities and women in order for them to be able to have programs, and especially encouraging NGOs that work with women and children and work with women and disadvantaged population. Thank you, sir. Again, welcome.
Thank you very much. Well, these are, of course, very important issues, definitely, and both socially and economically. but they are actually more of a government issue rather than central bank issue. Because you see, this is of course all developmental. And, but I mean the central bank, of course, as I said, provide the appropriate or the adequate environment for that. I mean, when we come back to the question of price stability, I mean, low inflation, all kind of affecting any kind of payment, all these things. I mean, you'll be surprised how much all these things, if they are done, they will help this project. So I think we are ready to help in providing this environment. But of course, and you know, in our law, in the central bank law, we are advisor to the government. We are said, I mean, central bank is an advisor to the government. Sometimes they don't listen to our advice, but that's a different thing. So I think the question here is that we can of course discuss that in the economic committee and mention to them any kind of action they should take. But if this action requires money, the government should pay, not the central bank. You see, the central bank actually, the money it pays is actually for the banks, for the stability, for short-term objective, for monetary stability, which is very good for development and even for this project.
Mindful of your time, just one more?
Well, I have only about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, one more question, maybe from this side of the room. Sir?
Ken Kuhn with Global Capital Investments. We are the general partner for the Iraq Fund. The question I have for you, Governor, and welcome, is in your view, what effect did the sharp drop in the CBI policy rate have on lending activity? And are you seeing any effects in the economy at a grassroots level?
The drop in the policy rate of the central bank. Yeah. Of course, I mean, we don't decide the policy rate only if we see the development in the economy and the fact and the behavior of inflation, I said. I mean, you see the behavior of inflation is very important, and of course, when I say, for example, monetary policy become, for example, more restrictive or accommodative, is of course this is of course reflected in the policy rate or other measures of monetary policy. So when we see, of course, all these development, and of course when we see, for example, inflation is high, we put up the policy rate. We actually make other parameters of monetary policy harder and all these things. And we are watching the situation just right now, actually, because of, as I said, because of inflation is going up. So actually the policy rate is really a function of all these development. I mean, inflation and all these things. But of course, this is the policy rate, which is actually in the central bank. But the rate which the banks lend with is probably different. I mean, what you see, probably if you want to borrow from the banks, from a commercial bank, I mean, it's very much higher, the rate. And this is, of course, we have actually policy liberalization or I mean, the banks, it is actually what judges the bank is the market. So they go sometimes and put a lot of marks or increase the their rate, which is not a policy rate, because the policy rate is in the central bank. So they increase the interest rate and all these things in order to, there are a lot of problems in terms of the uncertainty in the loans and this of repayment, all these things. So the policy rate is something which is supposed to guide the rate which the banks charge to their customers. But unfortunately, the banks sometimes, deviate very much from the policy rate. Well, this is a big subject, actually. This is, of course, one of the problems with our banking sector. I think it requires a special talk. I'm not 100% satisfied with the contribution of the banks yet. They are good, very good in actually some kind of intermediation, but the banks want to play things safe, so they either put some of their money in the central bank or they buy foreign exchange in the auction, and these are very safe. There's nothing actually risky. The risk is in the lending, and this is actually banking. So we don't have only problem with the government, we have problem with the banks also. But with dialogue, I think it's going to be solved.